Hello and welcome back to another evening of stories and shared company. Tonight we are going deep, really deep. We are covering every major controversy in South Park history, and if you know anything about this show, you already know that is a very, very long list. So get comfortable, grab a blanket, settle in, and let's get started. There is plenty to talk about, and we have got all the time in the world. Before we get into the controversies themselves, I think it is worth setting the stage a little bit. Because to understand why South Park has been able to generate the kind of outrage it has, you need to understand where it came from and the kind of people who made it. And honestly, the origin story of this show is almost as ridiculous as the show itself. It all started with two guys named Trey Parker and Matt Stone. They met at the University of Colorado in the early 90s, and they bonded over a shared love of comedy, animation, and pushing boundaries. In 1992, while still students, they made a short animated film called Jesus vs. Frosty. It was crude in every sense of the word, literally made with construction paper, glue, and stop-motion photography. The animation was jerky and ugly, and the whole thing was about Jesus Christ getting into a fight with a homicidal snowman. It was bizarre, it was offensive, and people loved it. A few years later, in 1995, they made a follow-up called Jesus vs. Santa. This one was a bit more polished, but still had that same handmade, rough-around-the-edges quality. A Fox broadcasting executive named Brian Graydon saw it and paid Parker and Stone to make copies of the short as video Christmas cards for his friends. Those copies got passed around Hollywood like wildfire. People were making copies of copies and sharing them at parties and in offices. It became one of the first truly viral videos, years before YouTube even existed. And that little short, made on a shoestring budget by two college guys who thought it would be funny to have Jesus and Santa beat the hell out of each other, caught the attention of Comedy Central. Comedy Central, at the time, was a relatively small cable channel, not the cultural force it would become. They took a chance on Parker and Stone and ordered a series. The pilot episode was called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, and it aired on August 13th, 1997. I want you to think about that title for a second. Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. This was the very first episode, not something they worked up to after a few safe seasons, the very first thing they put on television. And it worked. The premiere pulled a 1.3 Nielsen rating, which was solid for cable at the time, but what happened next was wild. By the 10th episode of that first season, the rating had skyrocketed to a 6.4. That is an enormous jump. South Park became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. And here's the thing that really mattered for Comedy Central. Before South Park, the channel had around 9 million household subscriptions. Within about a year of the show premiering, that number shot up to 50 million. South Park did not just put Comedy Central on the map, it basically built the map. The channel went from being something most people had never heard of to being appointment television for an entire generation. From the very beginning, the show made history in a way that most people do not even realize. South Park was the first weekly television program to receive a TVMA rating. That means it was the first show deemed unsuitable for anyone under 17 that aired on a weekly schedule. Before South Park, that rating existed, but no weekly series had ever carried it. The show wore it like a badge of honor. Now, a big part of what makes South Park unique, and a big part of why it can generate controversy so quickly and so effectively, is the way it is made. Most animated shows take 8 to 9 months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons, Family Guy, all those shows, they are working almost a year ahead of time. South Park, by contrast, produces each episode in 6 days. 6 days from the moment they start writing to the moment the finished episode is transmitted via satellite to Comedy Central, sometimes arriving just hours before it is supposed to air at 10 o'clock at night. This is genuinely insane. Trey Parker essentially writes the script himself at the start of the week. Then roughly 70 people, animators, editors, sound engineers, all of them work 100 to 120-hour weeks to get the thing done. There is a documentary about this process called 6 Days to Air that premiered on Comedy Central in October 2011, and watching it is honestly kind of stressful. You can see the bags under everyone's eyes, you can feel the tension in the room. But this brutal schedule is also what gives South Park its edge, because they can respond to real-world events almost in real time. If something major happens on a Monday, there can be a South Park episode about it by Wednesday. No other animated show can do that. And that speed means South Park can be dangerous in a way that other shows simply cannot. The animation style itself adds to the whole vibe. The original pilot was actually made with real construction paper and traditional stop motion. Every character was a little paper cutout that had to be physically moved frame by frame. That pilot took about 3 months to complete. After that, they switched to computer animation, but they deliberately made the computer animation look like paper cutouts. The whole show is designed to look cheap and homemade, even though the actual production process is incredibly sophisticated. Early seasons used CorelDRAW and a program called Alias Power Animator, running on Silicon graphics workstations. By season 5, they had moved to Autodesk Maya, which they still use today. And starting with season 13 in 2009, the show has been produced in native high definition. They even went back and re-rendered all the older episodes from the original archive files into full 1080p widescreen. So that crappy-looking paper cutout aesthetic, it is all very intentional. It is a creative choice, not a limitation. And it is a huge part of why the show feels the way it does. There is something about the simplicity of the animation that makes even the most outrageous content feel almost innocent. Like, how offensive can it really be if it looks like a child made it out of construction paper? The show centers on 4 boys in the fictional town of South Park, Colorado, which is based on the real South Park basin near the town of Fairplay. Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. They are elementary school kids who somehow keep getting caught up in absolutely insane situations. Alien abductions, volcanic eruptions, celebrity encounters, government conspiracies, religious apocalypses. The whole thing, and through it all, the boys, especially Stan and Kyle, tend to serve as the voices of reason. They are crude and foul-mouthed, sure, but they are usually the sanest people in the room. The adults around them are almost always the ones being irrational, hypocritical, and dangerous. That dynamic, where the kids are more reasonable than the adults, is the backbone of the entire show. And it is the engine that drives a lot of the satire. As of the season 28 finale on December 10th, 2025, South Park has produced 338 episodes across 28 seasons, including 7 Paramount Plus specials. And in July 2025, Parker & Stone signed a $1.5 billion extension deal with Paramount Global, guaranteeing 50 new episodes and securing the show through at least 2029 or 2030. So this is not a show that is winding down. It is a show that just got the biggest deal in the history of animated television and shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. And that, I think, is the most important thing to understand before we start digging into all the controversies. South Park was designed from the ground up to be provocative. Parker & Stone built a system that lets them respond to anything, mock anyone, and push every boundary, all within a week. And they have been doing it for nearly 3 decades. The controversies are not accidents. They are the entire point. The show exists to say the things that nobody else will say, to mock the people that nobody else will mock, and to see just how far they can push before someone pushes back. And as we are about to see, quite a few people have pushed back over the years. Some of them were religious organizations, some were governments, some were celebrities, and at least one was a group that issued actual death threats. But we will get to all of that. For now, let's start at the beginning, when the show was still finding its legs and the controversies were, relatively speaking, still kind of quaint. The early days when a swear word on cable television was enough to make national news. So the first few seasons of South Park were basically a masterclass in figuring out exactly where the line was and then stomping right over it. From the very first episode, with its alien abductions and anal probes, the show was drawing complaints. Parents' groups were furious. The Parents Television Council, which is this watchdog organization that monitors content on television, basically declared war on South Park almost immediately. And you have to remember, this was the late 90s. The cultural landscape was different. Ellen DeGeneres coming out on her sitcom was headline news. The idea of an animated show where 8-year-old children swore constantly, discussed graphic topics, and regularly witnessed horrific violence was genuinely shocking to a lot of people. There was real concern, or at least loudly expressed concern, that this show was going to corrupt an entire generation of kids. And Parker & Stone, to their credit, did not back down for a second. If anything, the outrage made them push harder. Season 1 featured an episode where Barbara Streisand transforms into a giant monster called Mecha Streisand and attacks the town. It was a direct, mean-spirited parody of the singer and actress, and reportedly Streisand was not pleased about it. The show did not care. They brought Mecha Streisand back years later in episodes 200 and 201, which we will get to eventually. But even in that first season, the pattern was set. No public figure is safe. No topic is off limits. If you complain, you're probably going to end up in the show next. The really interesting thing about those early controversies is that they were almost quaint compared to what came later. People were upset about language, about cartoon violence, about the general vulgarity of it all. Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh, a talking piece of feces who became a beloved holiday character, was considered deeply offensive when he debuted in Season 1. Today, he is practically nostalgic. The show has gone so far beyond talking poop jokes that those early episodes feel almost innocent by comparison. But then came the movie, and the movie is where things got genuinely interesting. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut hit theaters on June 30th, 1999. It was a full-length animated musical, and I need to emphasize that word, musical, because the songs in this film are legitimately brilliant. Trey Parker wrote them with Mark Shaman, and one of them, Blame Canada, was nominated for an Academy Award. Let me just let that sit for a moment. An Oscar-nominated song from a movie where Satan and Saddam Hussein are in a romantic relationship. That actually happened. Robin Williams performed the song at the Academy Awards ceremony, and the whole thing was surreal in the best possible way. The film had a budget of $21 million, and it grossed about $83.1 million worldwide. Those are solid numbers, especially for an animated film based on a cable TV show. But the numbers are not really the story. The story is what was in the movie and what happened behind the scenes during production. It entered the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most swearing in an animated film. That record stood for years. The MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, the organization that rates movies for theatrical release, originally gave the film an NC-17 rating. An NC-17 essentially means no one under 17 is admitted. And it is commercially devastating because many theaters refuse to show NC-17 films and many newspapers refuse to run ads for them. Parker and Stone had to go back and forth with the MPAA multiple times, submitting revised cuts, getting rejected, revising again. It was an exhausting process. What made it especially frustrating for the creators is that the MPAA would tell them a specific scene needed to be changed, but would not give specific guidance on what exactly was wrong or how to fix it. Parker has talked about this in interviews, describing the process as a guessing game where they would change one thing, resubmit, get rejected again, change something else, resubmit, and so on. They eventually got the rating down to R, but the experience left them with a deep resentment of the rating system. And in a very Parker and Stone move, they channeled that resentment directly into the movie itself. The title, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, is itself a joke about circumcision that sailed right past the MPAA. Parker and Stone have said that the original working title was even more explicit, but they changed it as something that was technically innocuous while being obviously suggestive. The fact that the ratings board approved the title without apparently understanding the joke was, to the creators, further proof that the system was arbitrary and absurd. And the beautiful irony is that the entire plot of the movie is about censorship. The boys see a Terrence and Phillip movie, which is the Canadian comedy duo within the South Park universe, and their parents freak out about the language in it and literally start a war with Canada. The movie is a satire of the exact moral panic that the show itself was causing in real life. The parents in the film are outraged about cartoon content corrupting their children, and the parents watching the film in real life were outraged about cartoon content corrupting their children. Parker and Stone were holding up a mirror, and a lot of people did not appreciate what they saw in it. The film also introduced some genuinely interesting world building for the South Park universe. Satan and Saddam Hussein's relationship, which plays out as a surprisingly sympathetic story about an abusive partner, gave Satan more depth than he had ever had on the show. And the musical numbers, especially the opening song and the finale, demonstrated that Parker had serious talent as a songwriter and composer. Talent that would eventually lead to the Book of Mormon over a decade later. I should also mention that around the same time, in the late 90s and early 2000s, South Park merchandise was everywhere. T-shirts, toys, video games, bumper stickers. Cartman's catchphrase, "Respect my authority," was on everything. The show had become a genuine cultural phenomenon in a way that went far beyond just the television episodes. Kids were wearing South Park merchandise to school, which led to its own set of controversies, as teachers and administrators tried to decide whether allowing 8-year-olds to wear shirts featuring characters who said things like, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," was appropriate. Some schools banned South Park merchandise outright, others decided it was not worth the fight. The debate over whether the show was suitable for children, or whether it was even intended for children, raged in parent-teacher meetings and school board sessions across the country. Parker and Stone, who were barely 30 at the time, found the whole thing hilarious. After the movie, the show came back for its 5th season in 2001, and this is where I think South Park truly leveled up in terms of both quality and controversy. The season premiere, an episode called "It Hits the Fan," was a very deliberate experiment. Parker and Stone wanted to test a theory. The word "shit" had been censored on television for decades. What would happen if you just said it, uncensored, over and over and over again? So they did. The episode used the word "shit," completely uncensored, 162 times in 22 minutes. There was an actual counter on screen tracking the number, and the point of the episode was that words only have power because we give them power. By saying the word so many times, it just becomes noise. It stops being shocking, it becomes meaningless. Which is, whether you agree with it or not, actually a pretty interesting philosophical argument. The media reaction was enormous. News outlets ran stories about it. People debated whether it was genius or garbage. And the episode proved its own point, because by the time the counter hit triple digits, the word really had lost all impact. It was just a sound. That same season also gave us Scott Tenorman Must Die, which I want to bring up not because it was publicly controversial in the traditional sense, but because it is widely considered the darkest and most defining Cartman moment in the entire series. It has a 9.6 out of 10 on IMDb, making it the highest rated episode in the show's history. Without going into full spoiler territory, because honestly, if you have not seen it, you deserve to experience it fresh. The episode involves Cartman enacting an elaborate, deeply disturbing revenge plot against an older kid named Scott Tenorman who humiliated him. The resolution is so dark, so perfectly constructed, and so utterly depraved that it redefined Cartman as a character forever. Before this episode, he was a fat, annoying, racist kid. After this episode, he was a genuine sociopath, and the show never looked back. What makes it relevant to our conversation about controversy is that it showed Parker and Stone were not just interested in surface-level shock. They could write something that was genuinely disturbing on a narrative level, not just because of swear words or gross-out humor, but because of what it revealed about human nature, or at least what it revealed about Cartman's nature. Also, in Season 5 was Super Best Friends. Now, this episode is really important for later, so I want to make sure we establish what it was. Super Best Friends aired on July 4th, 2001. In the episode, the religious figures of the world form a superhero team. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Moses, Joseph Smith, Lao Tse, and Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Muhammad was depicted openly with fire-based superpowers, fighting alongside the other religious figures. He was treated like any other character, he had lines, he was shown on screen without any kind of censorship or obscuring. And nobody cared. There was no controversy, no complaints, no protests, no threats. Muhammad appeared on South Park in 2001 and the world shrugged. I am emphasizing this because it becomes critically important later. The world was about to change in ways that nobody anticipated, and the fallout from those changes would eventually make this episode one of the most controversial in the show's history, retroactively, years after it originally aired with zero fanfare. But we will get to that. The early seasons also established another pattern that would define the show's relationship with controversy. And that is the equal opportunity approach. South Park does not pick sides, or more accurately, it picks every side. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Mormons, Scientologists, atheists, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, celebrities, politicians, corporations, everyone gets mocked, everyone gets skewered. And this is actually a really important part of understanding the show's longevity, because when you mock everyone equally, it becomes very difficult for any one group to claim they are being singled out. The show's defense has always been essentially, we make fun of everybody. If you are offended, it is because you think your particular group should be exempt from criticism. And that is exactly the kind of hypocrisy we exist to expose. Now, not everyone buys that argument, and there are legitimate criticisms to be made about whether truly equal mockery is even possible. But as a strategy for surviving controversy after controversy for nearly 30 years, it has worked remarkably well. And it set the stage for what came next, which was the show's first genuinely massive, world-altering controversy. One that involved a church, a beloved voice actor, and a closet that nobody wanted to come out of. So let's talk about Scientology. And more specifically, let's talk about one of the most beloved characters in South Park history and the incredibly sad story of how he was lost. Chef, the school cafeteria worker, was voiced by the legendary soul and funk musician Isaac Hayes. Hayes was a cultural icon long before South Park existed. He won an Academy Award for the theme from Shaft. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He was a deeply respected figure in the music world. And when Parker and Stone approached him to voice a character on their weird little cartoon show, he said yes, apparently just to see where it would go. He never expected it to become part of the cultural fabric the way it did. Chef became one of the most popular characters on the show. He was the wise, warm, slightly inappropriate adult that the boys could go to when they had awkward questions. He would break into song at random moments. He was funny, he was lovable, and Isaac Hayes brought this incredible warmth and musicality to the role that made Chef feel like more than just a cartoon character. He felt like someone's cool uncle who always had good advice, even if half of it was about romance. For nearly a decade, Van Hayes and the show existed in happy harmony. South Park mocked Christians, Jews, Muslims, Mormons, Buddhists, and pretty much every other religious and cultural group on the planet. Hayes, who was a practicing Scientologist, apparently had no issue with any of it. He cashed his checks, he recorded his lines, and he never publicly complained. Then came November 16th, 2005. Season 9, Episode 12, Trapped in the Closet. The episode is a direct, unflinching takedown of Scientology. The plot goes like this. Stan takes a free personality test from some Scientologists, and his thetan levels come back so high that the church declares him the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise shows up at Stan's house, and after Stan gives a lukewarm review of his acting, Cruise locks himself in Stan's closet and refuses to come out. The running joke throughout the entire episode is people trying to get Tom Cruise to come out of the closet. John Travolta shows up to help, and he ends up in the closet too. R. Kelly gets involved in a parody of his Trapped in the Closet music series, and he also ends up in the closet. But the most explosive part of the episode was not the celebrity jokes, it was the scene where the show actually explains what Scientologists believe. The Xenu story, the Galactic Overlord, the volcanoes, the thetans, all of it was laid out on screen in animated form. And at the bottom of the screen, in plain text, it said, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." That text stayed on screen throughout the entire explanation. It was not editorializing. It was not exaggerating for comedic effect. They were just showing what the religion teaches straight from Scientology's own doctrine and letting the audience draw their own conclusions, which of course was devastating because the beliefs are pretty bizarre when you lay them out plainly. The credits for the episode were also a deliberate provocation. Every single name in the credits, every writer, every animator, every producer, was listed as either John Smith or Jane Smith. Parker and Stone did this because Scientology has a well-known reputation for being aggressively litigious, and they were basically saying, good luck figuring out who to sue. Now, the immediate fallout from Trapped in the Closet was significant, but the real drama happened behind the scenes and played out over several months. First, there were reports that Tom Cruise threatened to pull out of his promotional duties for Mission Impossible 3, which was a Paramount Pictures film. Paramount and Comedy Central are both owned by the same parent company, Viacom, so Cruise essentially had leverage. A rerun of Trapped in the Closet was scheduled for March 15, 2006, and at the last minute, Comedy Central pulled it and replaced it with an older episode called Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls. The network claimed the scheduling change was a tribute to Isaac Hayes following his departure from the show. But reports from Fox News, E! News, and other outlets painted a very different picture. suggesting that Cruz's threats about the Mission Impossible press tour were the real reason. The Los Angeles Times gave the whole affair a name. They called it Closetgate. And that brings us to Isaac Hayes and the most tragic part of this whole story. On March 13, 2006, a public statement was released in Hayes' name, announcing that he was leaving South Park. The statement said, "There is a place in this world for satire, but there is a time when satire ends and intolerance and bigotry towards religious beliefs of others begins." While the statement did not mention Scientology by name, it was obviously about the Trapped in the Closet episode. Matt Stone responded publicly and did not hold back. He said that in 10 years and over 150 episodes, Isaac had never had a problem with the show making fun of Christians, Muslims, Mormons, or Jews. He said Hayes got a sudden case of religious sensitivity when it was his religion featured on the show. And he said that wanting a different standard for your own religion is where intolerance and bigotry begin. Stone and Parker released Hayes from his contract and publicly wished him well. But here's where the story takes a turn that is genuinely sad, because the truth, as we now know, is much more complicated than the public narrative that played out in 2006. Isaac Hayes had a stroke in January of 2006, a serious one. He lost the ability to speak. He lost much of his cognitive function. He had to relearn basic skills, including playing the piano. He was, according to his son, Isaac Hayes III, in no condition to resign from anything. Hayes III has spoken about this publicly multiple times now. In a 2016 interview with The Hollywood Reporter for the show's 20th anniversary, he said clearly that his father did not quit South Park. Someone quit South Park for him. At the time, according to Hayes III, everyone around his father, his assistants, his management, his publicists, were all Scientologists, and they made the decision to pull him from the show without his knowledge or consent. In a 2025 interview with Cracked, Hayes III elaborated further. He said his father loved the show. He loved Matt and Trey. He loved the character of Chef. He loved connecting with fans who recognized his voice, and he would never have quit voluntarily. Those decisions about his involvement in the show, his leaving the show, were made by those people and not by him. Hayes III also pointed out the obvious contradiction in the original narrative. His father had spent nearly a decade on a show that routinely mocked African American people, Jewish people, gay people, and every other group imaginable. The idea that he would suddenly draw the line at Scientology was, in his son's words, far too hypocritical for who his father actually was. Matt Stone has since confirmed this version of events. In 2016, he said they sort of figured out the whole picture a bit later, but that is totally what happened. Stone has also said that before the Trapped in the Closet episode aired, Hayes came to visit them, and it was pretty obvious from the conversation that somebody had sent him to ask them to pull the episode. They had not told Hayes about the episode in advance because they wanted to give him plausible deniability. Parker and Stone responded to Hayes' departure in the most South Park way possible. The first episode of Season 10, which aired just days after the public announcement, was called The Return of Chef. In the episode, Chef returns to South Park after having been brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, which is a thinly veiled stand-in for Scientology. The group is depicted as a pedophilic cult that brainwashes its members. Chef's dialogue in the episode was created by splicing together audio from Hayes' previous recordings on the show. And the result is intentionally jarring and disturbing. Chef says things he clearly never would have said, and the boys realize he has been taken over by something sinister. By the end of the episode, Chef is killed off in spectacularly gruesome fashion. It was brutal. It was angry. And underneath all the dark comedy, you could feel real hurt from Parker and Stone. They had lost a friend and collaborator, and they believed it was not his choice. Isaac Hayes passed away on August 10, 2008. He was 65 years old. He never returned to South Park. He never got to set the record straight himself. Parker and Stone dedicated a later episode, The China Program from Season 12, to his memory. The whole situation is genuinely one of the saddest chapters in the show's history. A man who loved his work, who loved the character he brought to life, who had a warm relationship with the creators, whose voice was taken from him by a stroke, and whose exit was orchestrated by people around him who had their own agenda. Hayes III has said publicly that he believes his father would still be on the show today if the decision had been left to him. And given everything we know, there is really no reason to doubt that. The Scientology controversy did not end with Chef's departure, of course. It continued to ripple through the show for years. Tom Cruise appeared again in episodes 200 and 201, and his trapped-in-the-closet portrayal became a recurring joke. But the loss of Chef and Isaac Hayes was the real lasting damage. It was the first time South Park's willingness to mock anything and everything had a deeply personal cost. And the fact that the cost was borne by someone who, by all accounts, did not even make the decision that led to it makes the whole thing even more painful. But South Park being South Park, the show moved on. And the next controversy was already waiting, one that would make Scientology look like a warm-up, because this one involved death threats, government censorship, a complete media firestorm, and episodes that, to this day, you cannot legally watch anywhere on the planet. To understand the Muhammad controversy, and I am going to walk through this carefully because it is both important and complicated, we need to go back to something I mentioned earlier, the episode Super Best Friends from Season 5, which aired on July 4th, 2001. In that episode, Muhammad was depicted as a member of a superhero team made up of religious figures. He had fire-based powers. He spoke. He was shown on screen, fully visible, fully animated, fully identifiable as a character, and nobody batted an eye. There was zero controversy, zero protests, zero threats. The episode aired, people watched it, and life went on. Muhammad even appeared briefly in the show's opening title sequence during that period, totally unremarkable at the time. But then the world changed, and I do not mean that in some vague, metaphorical way. I mean the actual world, the one we all live in, changed in ways that directly affected what could and could not be shown on television. In September 2005, a Danish newspaper called Jyllands-Posten published a series of cartoon depictions of Muhammad. The paper's stated goal was to test the limits of self-censorship in Western media. What followed was a global crisis. There were protests across the Muslim world. Embassies were attacked, people died, the cartoonists received death threats and had to go into hiding. The entire incident became a flashpoint for debates about free speech, religious sensitivity, and the boundaries of satire. Western media outlets were suddenly confronted with a question that had not really come up before in such stark terms. Is it acceptable to depict Muhammad in any visual form? In many Islamic traditions, any visual representation of the Prophet is considered deeply offensive and forbidden. Before the Danish cartoon controversy, this was not widely understood or discussed in Western media circles. After it, the rules were completely different. And South Park, being South Park, walked right into the middle of it. In Season 10, Episodes 3 and 4, Parker and Stone produced a two-part story called Cartoon Wars. The episodes aired in April 2006, just months after the Danish cartoon controversy. The plot centered on a fictional episode of Family Guy, the Fox animated series, that was going to include a depiction of Muhammad. The entire town of South Park panics because they are afraid of retaliatory violence. The episodes were a direct commentary on the media's fear of showing Muhammad, the self-censorship that had become standard practice since the Danish controversy, and what Parker and Stone saw as a dangerous precedent where threats of violence could dictate what was and was not acceptable to show on television. Here's where it gets interesting. In the original version of the episode, there was supposed to be an actual depiction of Muhammad. Parker and Stone wanted to show him plainly and simply to make their point about censorship. Comedy Central refused. The network inserted a black title card that read, in white text, Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network. Parker and Stone were furious. They later revealed in interviews that the title card was real. It was not a joke. The network genuinely censored the episode, and the irony was that an episode about censorship was itself censored, which in a weird way made the episode's point more effectively than the uncensored version ever could have. The Cartoon Wars episodes also took some pretty savage shots at Family Guy, portraying the show's writing process as a room full of manatees randomly pushing balls with words on them together to form jokes. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, reportedly took it in stride, but the media coverage at the time focused almost entirely on the Muhammad angle. The Family Guy parody was a sideshow. The main event was the censorship. What made the whole situation even more absurd, and Parker and Stone pointed this out repeatedly, was that Muhammad had already appeared on South Park 5 years earlier in Super Best Friends. He was shown openly, without censorship, without controversy. The episode was still available to watch on the South Park website and in reruns. The rules had changed, not because of anything South Park did, but because of real-world violence committed by people who had nothing to do with the show. And now, suddenly, what was perfectly acceptable in 2001 was completely forbidden in 2006. Parker and Stone gave multiple interviews in the years between Cartoon Wars and what came next, consistently expressing frustration at what they saw as a double standard. They could show Jesus in any number of compromising, embarrassing, or outright blasphemous situations. They could depict Buddha doing cocaine, they could mock Moses, Krishna, Joseph Smith, and every other religious figure they wanted. But Muhammad was off limits, not because of any internally consistent moral principle, but because one specific group had made it clear that there would be violent consequences for depicting him. And in Parker and Stone's view, giving into that was not respect, it was fear. And a society that allows fear to dictate what can and cannot be said is a society that has already lost something important. Now, I want to be clear here. I am not taking sides on this. There are sincere, deeply held religious beliefs about the depiction of Muhammad, and millions of Muslims around the world hold those beliefs peacefully and have every right to them. The controversy is not about whether those beliefs are valid. It is about whether the threat of violence should determine what a television show can air, and whether there should be different rules for different religions based on who is willing to enforce those rules through intimidation. Those are genuinely complicated questions, and reasonable people can disagree about them. Parker and Stone have a clear position, but it is not the only reasonable position. What is not really debatable, though, is that the Cartoon Wars controversy was just the warm-up, because 4 years later, Parker and Stone decided to push the issue again. And this time, the consequences were not just abstract debates about free speech. This time, people's lives were in danger. That brings us to 2010 and episodes 200 and 201, the two episodes that became the most controversial, the most censored, and ultimately the most banned in South Park history. But those episodes are a story unto themselves, and they deserve their own chapter. So let me take a breath here, and then we will get into what happened when South Park decided to celebrate its 200th episode by revisiting every controversy it had ever created all at once, with Muhammad right in the center of it all. I honestly think this might be the wildest thing the show has ever done, and that is saying something for a show where a kid once fed another kid's parents to him in a bowl of chili. But what happened with 200 and 201 went beyond the show itself. It became a national conversation about the limits of free speech. It involved the New York City Police Department. It involved Congress. It involved real, credible threats of murder. And the ripple effects are still being felt today, so settle in for this one, because it is a lot. Episode 200 of South Park aired on April 14th, 2010. And right from the jump, it was clear that Parker and Stone had decided to go all in. The episode was designed as a celebration of the show's history, a look back at all the characters, storylines, and controversies that had defined the series up to that point. But it was not a clip show or a nostalgic victory lap. It was a brand new story that deliberately stitched together the show's most controversial moments into one massive, sprawling plot. The setup was this: Tom Cruise is working at a chocolate fudge factory in South Park. The boys visit on a class field trip and see Cruise literally packing fudge. They call him a fudge packer, which is exactly what he's doing. But Cruise takes it as an insult and threatens to sue the entire town. He rallies every celebrity who has ever been mocked on South Park over the years, and we are talking a huge list here, to file a class action lawsuit against the town. The only way Cruise will drop the lawsuit is if South Park delivers Muhammad to him. Why? Because Muhammad possesses a unique ability. He cannot be ridiculed. He cannot be mocked. His image cannot even be shown. And Cruise wants that power for himself. If he can absorb Muhammad's immunity to mockery, no one will ever be able to make fun of him again. It is a really clever premise because it takes the real-world censorship of Muhammad and turns it into a plot device. The idea that Muhammad has some kind of magical power that prevents him from being satirized is, of course, South Park's way of commenting on the fact that every other religious and public figure can be mocked freely, but Muhammad cannot. Not because of any magical power, but because of the very real threat of violence. Throughout the episode, Muhammad appears on screen, but he is hidden inside a bear costume. You cannot see him. He is obscured the entire time, and even this was too much for some people. because between the airing of episode 200 and the airing of episode 201 a week later, something happened that took the controversy from a television debate to a genuine security threat. A New York-based organization called Revolution Muslim posted a message on their website directed at Parker and Stone. The message warned that the South Park creators risked ending up like Theo van Gogh. Van Gogh was a Dutch filmmaker who had made a short film called Submission, which criticized the treatment of women in some Muslim communities. In November 2004, Van Gogh was murdered on the streets of Amsterdam. He was shot and then stabbed, and a note was pinned to his body with a knife. Revolution Muslim's post included a photo of Van Gogh's body alongside the warning. The post stated that this was not a threat, but a warning of the reality of what would likely happen to Parker and Stone. Now, whatever Revolution Muslim wanted to call it, the rest of the world saw it as exactly what it was: a threat. The New York City Police Department increased security at Comedy Central's headquarters in Manhattan. Law enforcement officials publicly stated that while Revolution Muslim itself was considered to be mostly talk and had never carried out actual violence, they were concerned that the post could inspire violence from others who might see it and act on it. The response to the threat was immediate and widespread. On April 22, 2010, Jon Stewart devoted a 10-minute segment of The Daily Show to the situation. He expressed disgust at Revolution Muslim, condemned their hypocrisy for enjoying American freedom of speech while trying to suppress someone else's, and ended the segment with a musical number telling the organization to go away, though he used much stronger language than that. Bill Maher on Real Time also defended South Park, saying that the incident should serve as a reminder that American culture is not just different from a culture that makes death threats over cartoons, it is better. Meanwhile, Parker and Stone had already completed episode 201 and sent it to Comedy Central. And this is where things went sideways. Comedy Central, without the knowledge or consent of Parker and Stone, made extensive edits to the episode before it aired. Every mention of Muhammad's name was bleeped out with audio censorship. Several portions of dialogue were obscured. And most significantly, almost the entire ending was censored. The episode's conclusion featured 3 consecutive speeches by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus about the moral of the story. Those speeches were almost completely bleeped out. You could hear virtually nothing of what was being said. Immediately after the episode aired on April 21, 2010, the South Park Studios website posted a notice. It read that Comedy Central had inserted numerous additional audio bleeps throughout the episode, and that the notice was intended to clarify that the bleeps were not the creator's choice. Parker and Stone wanted people to know that they had been censored against their will. And here is the deepest layer of irony in this whole mess. According to reports from people who have seen or heard the uncensored version of the speech, Kyle's final monologue was about how violence and intimidation are the only things that actually work to silence people. The speech was about censorship. It was about how the threat of violence is the most effective form of suppression, and Comedy Central censored it. The speech about censorship was itself censored. You could not write a more perfect demonstration of the show's point if you tried. Parker and Stone's official response was delivered through their lawyer and signed with the names Trey Parker and Matt Stone, servants of the Dark Lord Xenu. A final jab at Scientology woven into a completely different controversy. That is so perfectly South Park. The aftermath of the 200 and 201 controversy was severe and lasting. Both episodes were pulled from streaming services, reruns, and syndication. They have never been made available again on any official platform. You cannot watch them on Paramount Plus. You cannot watch them on the South Park website. They are simply gone. But it did not stop there. Super Best Friends, the 2001 episode where Muhammad had originally appeared without controversy, was also retroactively pulled from all platforms. Cartoon Wars, Part 1 and Part 2 from Season 10, were removed from streaming bundles. In total, 5 episodes of South Park have been effectively banned from legal distribution. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200 and 201. The DVD release of Season 14 included the uncensored version of Episode 200, but Episode 201 was presented in its original censored form even on the home media release. In the DVD commentary for both episodes, Parker and Stone never mentioned Muhammad by name, referring to him only as the prophet of the Muslim faith. At one point in the commentary for 201, Parker notes that they made the episode as intended and sent it in. Then a long audio bleep obscures whatever they say next, and when it comes back, Stone simply says, "Yeah, that is pretty much it." In the weeks and months that followed, the controversy continued to generate headlines. Some people connected it to the failed car bombing in Times Square on May 1st, 2010. Though this connection was always speculative, U.S. Congressman Peter King mentioned the South Park controversy as one possible motive out of 100, but the suspect who was eventually arrested, Faisal Shahzad, had reportedly been planning his attack for months before the episodes aired, and Revolution Muslim denied any connection. What is more clearly connected is the broader cultural movement that the censorship inspired. In May 2010, in direct response to the suppression of episodes 200 and 201, a movement called Everybody Draw Muhammad Day was launched online. The idea was that if enough people drew images of Muhammad simultaneously, it would be impossible to threaten all of them. It was a mass act of defiance against the principle that violence could silence free expression. The movement was controversial in its own right, with some supporting it as a free speech stand and others criticizing it as unnecessarily provocative. But its existence was a direct result of what happened to South Park. Parker and Stone, characteristically, have not spent a lot of time publicly dwelling on the experience. They moved on to the next episode, the next controversy, the next season, but in rare interviews over the years, they have expressed real frustration. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weary disbelief that this is where things ended up. That in a show where they have mocked every religion, every political leader, every sacred cow in American and global culture, the one line they genuinely cannot cross is not because of any moral principle or artistic boundary, but because of the credible threat that someone might kill them for crossing it. And I think that is what makes the Muhammad saga so significant in the history of South Park controversies. It is the one that went beyond entertainment, beyond ratings, beyond angry letters and boycott threats. It touched something fundamental about how free societies deal with the tension between expression and violence. And the fact that the episodes remain banned over 15 years later means that in at least one sense, the censors won. The violence, or the threat of it, worked. The speech about how violence works was silenced by the threat of violence. And that is either the most darkly ironic thing in the history of television or the saddest. Probably both. All right, let's move to something a little lighter. Well, lighter in relative terms, because the next controversies involve a dead crocodile hunter, a menstruating Virgin Mary, and the Pope. And yes, I am aware that nothing about that sentence is actually light, but compared to death threats and banned episodes, we are at least back in the realm of standard South Park outrage, which is still pretty outrageous, honestly. Let's start with Steve Irwin, because this one is a really interesting case study in what people find acceptable and what they do not. Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, died on September 4th, 2006. He was killed by a stingray barb that pierced his heart while he was filming a documentary on the Great Barrier Reef. His death was sudden, shocking, and deeply felt around the world. Irwin was one of those genuinely beloved public figures. He was enthusiastic, funny, passionate about wildlife, and seemed like a legitimately good person. People loved him, and his death hit hard. Less than 2 months later, on October 25th, 2006, South Park aired an episode called Hell on Earth 2006. The episode was the show's Halloween special for that year. The main plot is that Satan decides to throw a massive costume party on Earth. He obsesses over every detail of the party, throwing tantrums when things go wrong, essentially acting like a spoiled teenager on one of those My Super Sweet 16 reality shows from MTV. Meanwhile, Butters summons the ghost of Biggie Smalls through a mirror, and 3 notorious serial killers, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy, are sent to pick up a Ferrari-shaped cake, but they keep killing people along the way in a parody of the Three Stooges. All of that generated essentially zero controversy. The serial killer comedy, The Satan Party, Biggie Smalls as a ghost, none of it raised eyebrows. But there was one brief scene in the episode that set off a media firestorm. A guest shows up at Satan's party with a stingray sticking out of his chest. Satan sees him and assumes he is wearing a tasteless costume, telling him it is in really bad taste to dress up as Steve Irwin so soon after the man's death. But then it turns out it is actually Steve Irwin, and Satan kicks him out of the party for not wearing a costume. The scene lasted maybe 30 seconds, but the reaction was enormous. An anonymous spokesperson close to the Irwin family said that Terry Irwin, Steve's widow, was devastated. The spokesperson said her worry was that their children, Bindi and Bob, would see it and break down. Steve had as big a sense of humor as anyone, the spokesperson said, but this goes too far too soon. Mark Amey, a fellow naturalist and friend of Irwin, called the show, and I'm going to quote him directly here, distasteful. John Byer, who was the director of Media Watch UK, said the scene was in bad taste and that the makers of South Park should review their decision. The British and Australian media in particular went after the episode hard. Parker and Stone were genuinely surprised by the backlash. They said in the Season 10 DVD commentary that they could not understand why the Steve Irwin joke caused more controversy than the episode's depiction of 3 real-life serial killers being played for comedy. Ted Bundy murdered at least 30 people. Jeffrey Dahmer killed and dismembered 17 men and boys. John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men. These real people who committed real horrific crimes were used as comic relief in the same episode, and nobody seemed to care. But a brief, arguably affectionate joke about Steve Irwin showing up in hell with a stingray in his chest crossed the line. Parker and Stone found the inconsistency baffling. They also pointed out that in South Park's internal mythology, pretty much everyone ends up in hell, so Irwin's appearance there was not meant as a judgment on him as a person. Comedy Central's official response was measured. A spokesperson said the show has offended people in the past and probably will again, and that regular watchers would not be shocked by the content, which is technically true, but probably was not very comforting to the Irwin family. I think the Steve Irwin controversy is actually one of the most revealing ones in the show's history. Not because of what it says about South Park, but because of what it says about audiences. People can watch a show where children are murdered, where real-world tragedies are mocked, where serial killers are turned into stooges, and shrug it off. But touch someone they love, someone they feel a personal connection to, and suddenly the line has been crossed. The threshold for offense is not rational, it is emotional. And South Park, whether intentionally or not, has always been brilliant at finding exactly where that emotional threshold is. What is also interesting is that this was not the first time Steve Irwin appeared on the show. There was an episode in Season 2 called Prehistoric Iceman where a character who was very obviously based on Irwin appeared and was killed by a helicopter blade while trying to capture a prehistoric human. That episode aired in 1999, while Irwin was very much alive and nobody complained. The joke was essentially the same: it is dangerous to get too close to wild creatures, and this guy does it for a living, so one day his luck is going to run out. But because Irwin was alive in 1999, it was comedy. Because he was recently dead in 2006, it was cruelty. Same joke, same target, completely different reaction based on timing. Now let me shift to another controversy that hit around the same time period. The Bloody Mary episode. This one aired on December 7, 2005, as the Season 9 finale, just a few weeks after Trapped in the Closet. If the Scientology episode was a surgical strike aimed at one specific organization, Bloody Mary was a cruise missile aimed at the Catholic Church. The episode's plot involves Randy Marsh getting arrested for drunk driving and being forced to attend Alcoholics Anonymous. The AA program tells him that alcoholism is a disease, that he is powerless to stop it, and that only a higher power can save him. Randy takes this literally and decides he needs a miracle. Meanwhile, a statue of the Virgin Mary at a local church appears to be bleeding. Pilgrims flock to it, hoping for healing. The Pope himself, specifically Pope Benedict XVI, comes to investigate. Now here's where the episode got controversial. The statue is not bleeding from its eyes or hands or any of the traditional places where religious statues are said to bleed. It is bleeding from a much less reverent area. The Pope examines the statue and initially declares it a miracle. Then he takes a closer look, and without getting too specific about the details, the scene is deliberately designed to be as blasphemous and visually shocking as possible. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, led by its president Bill Donahue, launched an immediate and very aggressive campaign against the episode. Donahue called it hate speech and demanded that Comedy Central never air it again. The Catholic League organized letter-writing campaigns, contacted advertisers, and made the rounds on cable news. They wanted the episode pulled permanently. Comedy Central did not pull the episode. But the controversy generated a huge amount of media coverage and put the show back in the crosshairs of religious organizations just weeks after the Scientology dispute. Parker and Stone, who by this point were probably getting pretty used to angry press releases from religious groups, seemed largely unbothered. The episode stayed in rotation, it remained available on streaming and home media, and the Catholic League's campaign, while loud, ultimately failed to achieve its goal of permanent removal. What makes the Bloody Mary controversy interesting in hindsight is the contrast with the Muhammad controversy that came later. The Catholic League was furious. They mobilized their members, they went on television, they wrote letters. But they did not threaten anyone with violence. And because they did not threaten violence, the episode was never censored, never banned, and never pulled. It is still available to watch today on any platform that carries South Park. The Trapped in the Closet episode, which offended Scientology, was temporarily pulled, but eventually returned. The Muhammad episodes, which were met with genuine threats of murder, are gone forever. There is a very uncomfortable conclusion you can draw from that pattern, and it is essentially the same conclusion that Kyle's censored speech in episode 201 was making. The Catholic League protested loudly and accomplished nothing. Scientology applied corporate pressure and accomplished a brief delay. The group that made death threats accomplished permanent censorship. The more extreme the reaction, the more effective it was. Whether you find that observation horrifying or just sadly realistic, it is the pattern. And South Park has, intentionally or not, demonstrated it through its own history more clearly than any essay or op-ed ever could. I also want to briefly mention one more religious controversy from around this period, because it often gets overlooked, but it is genuinely funny in a dark sort of way. Throughout the show's run, South Park has depicted Jesus Christ as a regular character who lives in town. Jesus has been shown watching pornography, using automatic weapons, doing drugs, getting into fistfights, and generally behaving in ways that are wildly inconsistent with how most Christians would want their Messiah portrayed. He has appeared in dozens of episodes over the years, and while there have been occasional complaints from Christian groups, the reaction has never been remotely close to the intensity generated by the Muhammad episodes. Jesus on South Park does everything. He has a public access television show, he gets into cage matches, he tries to raise his ratings by performing miracles. And the Christian response, broadly speaking, has ranged from mild disapproval to just ignoring it. Compare that to the Muhammad situation, where the mere suggestion of showing Muhammad, even hidden inside a bear costume, resulted in death threats. The discrepancy is stark, and Parker and Stone have made it clear that they see this discrepancy as the core of the issue. Their argument has always been that if you can mock Jesus, Buddha, Moses, and every other religious figure freely, but you cannot mock Muhammad, then the principle is not religious respect. The principle is fear of violence, and they do not think fear is a principle worth respecting. Whether you agree with that position or not, it is the philosophical backbone of a huge chunk of South Park's most controversial episodes. And it is the reason why the show keeps coming back to these themes, even after everything that happened with 200 and 201. Because for Parker and Stone, the moment you stop saying something because someone threatened you for saying it, you have already lost. All right, enough about religion for now. Let's talk about something that should, in theory, be much less complicated. Let's talk about South Park versus entire countries, because it turns out that when you are an equal opportunity offender with a nearly 30-year track record and a 6-day production cycle that lets you respond to current events in real time, eventually you're going to anger not just individuals or organizations, but actual governments. And South Park has managed to get itself banned, censored, or scrubbed from existence in several countries around the world. Some of these bans are relatively quiet, others became international news. Let's start with the biggest one, China. On October 2nd, 2019, Comedy Central aired the second episode of South Park's 23rd season. It was called Banned in China. And it was, even by South Park standards, a remarkably direct attack on one of the most powerful governments in the world. The episode had two parallel storylines. In the first, Randy Marsh travels to China to try to expand his Tegrity Farms marijuana business into the Chinese market. He gets arrested almost immediately and is thrown into a labor camp that is clearly meant to evoke the real-world detention facilities that China has used in Xinjiang province to hold Uyghur Muslims. While in prison, Randy meets two of his fellow inmates, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. They are in prison because, as Piglet explains, some people said Pooh looked like the Chinese president, so they are illegal in China now. This is a reference to a real thing, by the way. Images of Winnie the Pooh have been censored on Chinese social media since at least 2013 because internet users noticed a resemblance between the cartoon bear and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The comparison became a popular meme, and the Chinese government responded by blocking Pooh-related content on major platforms. It is one of those facts that sounds too absurd to be true, but is completely real. The episode's second storyline follows Stan, Kenny, Butters, and Jimmy forming a death metal band called Crimson Dawn. After becoming popular, they are offered a movie deal, but the script keeps getting revised by Chinese censors who are physically present on set, watching over the writer's shoulders and deleting anything that might offend the Chinese government. The list of forbidden topics includes the Dalai Lama, homosexuality, organ transplants, and of course, Winnie the Pooh. Stan eventually gives up and says he cannot bring himself to compromise his art for the Chinese market, and that anyone who does is worthless. There is also a subplot where Mickey Mouse shows up to make sure all Disney's properties play ball with the Chinese authorities, which is a pretty pointed reference to the way Disney has been accused of tailoring its content to satisfy Chinese censors in order to maintain access to the enormous Chinese market. The episode ends with Randy murdering Winnie the Pooh by strangling him with honey in a dark alley, while Piglet watches in horror, because the existence of Pooh is what is blocking Randy's business deal with the Chinese government. It is dark, absurd, and exactly the kind of thing South Park does. The response from China was swift and absolute. Within days of the episode airing, the entire South Park franchise was scrubbed from the Chinese internet. Every episode, every clip, every discussion thread, every fan page, all gone. The show was removed from Baidu, which is China's biggest search engine. It was removed from Weibo, which is their equivalent of Twitter. It was removed from Douban, which is like their version of IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes. It was removed from Bilibili, Youku, and every other streaming and social media platform. Searching for South Park on any Chinese platform returned nothing. Billions of past posts on Weibo that mentioned the show were made invisible. It was as if South Park had never existed in China. Now Parker and Stone's response to this was absolutely perfect, and it is the reason this story became international news. On October 7th, 2019, they posted a statement to the official South Park Twitter account. It was titled Official Apology to China. And it read, and I want to be really precise about this because the exact wording matters, it said, like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She does not look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China? The NBA reference was deliberate and timely. Just days before the South Park controversy, Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey had posted a tweet supporting pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. China's national broadcaster responded by pulling NBA games from the air, and the NBA spent days trying to appease Chinese authorities while also not completely abandoning Morey. It was a very public example of an American organization bending to Chinese pressure. Parker and Stone saw that happening in real time and folded it into their response. The fake apology went massively viral. It was covered by CBS News, CNBC, Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Al Jazeera, the BBC, the South China Morning Post, and basically every major news outlet on the planet. It became one of the most shared posts of that entire news cycle. A professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy even wrote an article for the Modern War Institute praising the episode and Parker and Stone's response as an important moment in American information warfare and soft power against Chinese authoritarianism, which is a sentence I never thought I would say about the creators of a show where a kid once crapped out his mouth. The China ban remains in effect as far as anyone can tell. South Park is still completely unavailable through official channels in mainland China. And the Banned in China episode remains freely available on every Western platform, a permanent reminder that South Park managed to get an entire 28-season show erased from the internet of the world's most populous country with a single episode. Love them or hate them, that is an impressive amount of provocation from a cartoon. But China was not the only country to ban South Park. India got there first, actually. In 2010, the Indian Ministry of Broadcasting banned the series outright due to what they described as extreme vulgarity. South Park simply did not air in India for nearly a decade. It was not until Netflix India acquired the streaming rights in 2019 that Indian audiences could legally watch the show. And even then, it came with a strict 18+ rating. The India ban never generated the same kind of international attention as the China ban, partly because it happened earlier and partly because there was no single provocative episode that triggered it. It was more of a blanket decision based on the show's general content. Australia has had its own complicated relationship with the franchise. The Hell on Earth 2006 episode, the one with Steve Irwin and the Stingray, generated particular outrage in Australia for obvious reasons. Irwin was a national icon there, and airing a joke about his death just weeks after it happened did not go over well with Australian audiences or media. But the bigger Australia controversy was actually about the video games. South Park: The Stick of Truth was a video game released in 2014 that was developed by Obsidian Entertainment. It is a full role-playing game set in the South Park universe, and it is actually really good. It won awards and received excellent reviews. But it also contained certain interactive sequences that the Australian Classification Board found unacceptable. Specifically, there were scenes involving alien anal probing that the player actively participates in, and there was a minigame involving an abortion procedure. The game was initially refused classification in Australia, which effectively meant it could not be sold there. A censored version was eventually released for the Australian market, and similar censored versions were created for European and Israeli markets. What is funny about the Australian censorship is the way the developers handled it. In the censored versions, whenever a scene was removed, it was replaced with a still image of a person or a koala bear crying, accompanied by text explaining in great detail exactly what was supposed to be happening in the scene you were not being allowed to see. So the censorship actually drew more attention to the content than just showing it would have. It was the same principle as the Cartoon Wars title card. Sometimes the censorship makes the point better than the content ever could. The show is also reportedly wholly banned in several other countries. Though the specifics are less well documented. Various episodes have been pulled or edited in different markets around the world depending on local content regulations and sensitivities. But the major bans, China, India, and the selective censorship in Australia, are the ones that tell the most interesting stories about how different cultures respond to the same content. What I find genuinely fascinating about all of this is the range of responses. China enacted a complete, totalitarian erasure of the show from its internet. India issued a formal government ban based on general vulgarity standards. Australia tried to censor specific content in a specific product while generally allowing the show to air. Each response reflects the values and governance structures of the country in question. China does not tolerate criticism of its leadership. Period. India has robust content regulations that prioritize decency standards. Australia has a classification system that draws specific lines around interactive content. South Park, by being equally offensive to everyone, has essentially become a litmus test for how different governments approach free expression. And in every case, Parker and Stone's response has been the same. They do not apologize. They do not modify their content. They mock the censorship itself. The China fake apology is the most famous example, but their general posture toward anyone who tries to suppress their work has been consistent for nearly 3 decades. You ban us, we make an episode about it, you censor us, the censorship becomes the joke. The more you try to silence us, the louder we get. There is something almost admirable about that consistency, even if you do not agree with everything the show does. In a world where most entertainment companies bend over backwards to avoid offending anyone, especially anyone with economic or political power, South Park stands pretty much alone as a major entertainment property that genuinely does not care. And the fact that they have been doing it since 1997 and are now signed through at least 2030 suggests that there is a real, substantial audience for that kind of fearlessness, or recklessness, depending on your perspective. Now, we have been spending a lot of time in the past talking about the controversies that defined the show's first 2 decades. But South Park did not stop being controversial after 2019. If anything, the show entered a new phase where the controversies became more politically charged, more personally targeted, and in some ways more dangerous than ever. So let's bring this story into the present and talk about what happened when South Park decided to take on the culture wars, the pandemic, and eventually the President of the United States. But before we jump to the modern era, I want to pause and cover a few more controversies from the show's middle years that are really worth talking about. Because the period between 2006 and 2015 was actually one of the show's richest in terms of both quality and controversy. And there are some incidents from that era that deserve more attention. Let's talk about Margaritaville from season 13, which aired in March 2009. This episode tackled the 2008 financial crisis, and it did so with a directness and intelligence that surprised a lot of people. The plot has the town of South Park falling into an economic depression after everyone realizes they have been spending irresponsibly. Randy Marsh becomes convinced that the economy is an angry and vengeful god that must be appeased through sacrifice and austerity. Meanwhile, Kyle tries to stimulate the local economy by going on a massive spending spree, essentially taking on the role of a Keynesian economic savior. The episode interweaves the economic satire with a parallel storyline that mirrors the story of Jesus Christ, with Kyle as the Christ figure sacrificing himself to pay off everyone's debts. It sounds ridiculous when you describe it, and it is ridiculous, but it is also surprisingly astute as economic commentary. The episode won a Primetime Emmy Award and was widely praised by critics and economists alike for capturing the absurdity and real human pain of the financial collapse in a way that straight news coverage often failed to do. It also annoyed quite a few people in the financial industry who felt that comparing economic policy to religious zealotry was unfair, which is exactly the kind of response that tells you the satire hit its mark. Then there is the Man-Bear-Pig saga, which is one of the most fascinating long-running controversies within the show. Al Gore first appeared on South Park in a season 10 episode from 2006 called Man-Bear-Pig. In the episode, Gore is depicted as a deranged, attention-seeking figure who is desperately trying to warn everyone about a creature called Man-Bear-Pig, which is half man, half bear, and half pig. Nobody takes him seriously. The creature does not appear to exist. Gore is shown as a buffoon who is manufacturing a crisis for personal relevance. The episode was widely interpreted as a mockery of Gore's climate change activism. Man-Bear-Pig was the stand-in for global warming, and the message seemed to be that Gore was exaggerating or inventing the threat for his own ego. At the time, this interpretation was controversial but not particularly unusual. Climate change skepticism was much more mainstream in 2006 than it is now, and plenty of commentators were making similar arguments, just without the cartoon Bear-Pig-Man hybrid. What makes the Man-Bear-Pig story really interesting is what happened 12 years later, in season 22. In 2018, Man-Bear-Pig returned, and this time the creature was very, very real. It was destroying the town, killing people, and causing genuine devastation. The adults of South Park tried to ignore it, tried to bargain with it, tried to find loopholes in their deal with it. But Man-Bear-Pig could not be wished away. The episode was widely interpreted as an apology of sorts. Parker and Stone were essentially saying, okay, we were wrong. The threat was real, we should have listened, and now it might be too late. The two-part episode from 2018, called Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, depicted the townspeople literally having made a deal with Man-Bear-Pig decades ago, trading future safety for present comfort. Sound familiar? The parallels to humanity's relationship with fossil fuels and environmental destruction were unmistakable. And having Al Gore return, this time as the person who was right all along while everyone else was in denial, was a remarkable moment of self-correction from a show that almost never admits it was wrong about anything. Fans debated whether this constituted a genuine apology or just another layer of satire. Parker and Stone never explicitly said they were apologizing, but the episode spoke for themselves, and the critical consensus was that South Park had, in its own weird way, acknowledged that its earlier take on climate change had been too dismissive. I also want to mention the Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 because while it was not controversial in the same way as the Muhammad episodes or the Scientology takedown, it was controversial in a different and interesting way. The three-part epic was the most ambitious thing South Park had ever attempted at that point. It involved a terrorist attack on the world of human imagination, which is depicted as a real place populated by every fictional character ever created. Jesus, Santa, Luke Skywalker, Gandalf, the Care Bears, and hundreds of other characters all appear. The storyline involved a military response to the attack, a meta-commentary on the war on terror, and a subplot where Cartman tries to force Kyle to perform an obscene act based on a bet. The trilogy was later recut and released as a direct-to-video film called Imaginationland the Movie in 2008, and that version won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. The controversy around the original aired version centered on the sheer density of copyrighted characters used without permission from their respective owners. South Park claimed fair use protection for parody, and no major lawsuits materialized. But the episodes pushed the boundaries of what constituted acceptable use of other people's intellectual property. The trilogy also featured a scene where Cartman goes to the Supreme Court to enforce his bet with Kyle, which was a parody of how far people will go to win petty arguments, but the specific nature of the bet was graphic enough that it generated its own wave of complaints. The Coon trilogy from season 14 is another one worth mentioning. These episodes, Coon 2 Hindsight, Mysterion Rises, and Coon vs. Coon and Friends, were a sustained parody of superhero films and the BP oil spill that had happened earlier that year. The 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster had devastated the Gulf of Mexico, and South Park's response was to depict BP's CEO apologizing endlessly while doing absolutely nothing to fix the problem. The catchphrase, "We're sorry," became a running joke that captured the hollow corporate contrition that had characterized BP's public response. The episodes also revealed the truth about Kenny McCormick's repeated deaths throughout the series, establishing that Kenny has the power of immortality and that he dies and returns to life constantly, with nobody remembering his deaths the next day. This was actually a major mythology reveal for the show, and the fact that it was buried inside a superhero parody about an oil spill is peak South Park storytelling. One more controversy I want to touch on from this middle period is the show's relationship with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. This is a minor one, but it is revealing. In multiple episodes over the years, the show has depicted children with terminal illnesses in comedic situations. The episode Stanley's Cup from season 10 is probably the most extreme example. The episode parodies sports movies and features a terminally ill child whose last wish is to see his Pee-wee hockey team win. Without giving away the ending, the episode does not deliver the heartwarming resolution that sports movies typically provide, and the result is genuinely bleak. The episode divided fans sharply, with some finding it hilarious in its subversion of expectations and others finding it needlessly cruel. Parker and Stone have addressed these criticisms in various interviews over the years, generally saying that they believe comedy should be allowed to go anywhere, and that treating certain topics as off-limits for humor actually does a disservice to the people affected by those topics. Their argument is that laughter is not the same as disrespect, and that the ability to find humor in even the darkest situations is a fundamentally human coping mechanism. Whether you agree with that philosophy or not, it has been remarkably consistent throughout the show's run. All right, now I think we are truly ready to talk about the modern era. The shift started in 2015 with season 19 and an episode called Stunning and Brave. This episode introduced P.C. Principal, a hulking, aggressive, fraternity bro type character who becomes the new school principal and immediately begins enforcing political correctness with an almost comical level of intensity. He screams at people for microaggressions. He organizes mandatory sensitivity training. He punishes anyone who says anything that could be interpreted as offensive, regardless of context or intent. The character was designed to satirize what Parker and Stone saw as a growing trend of performative progressivism. The idea that loudly proclaiming your commitment to social justice was becoming more important than actually being a good person. PC Principal was initially written as a one-off antagonist, someone the boys would defeat by the end of the season. But something interesting happened. The character worked so well as a comic device that the writers kept him around. He became a permanent part of the cast and even evolved over subsequent seasons into something more nuanced than a simple caricature. In later seasons, PC Principal becomes a father, develops genuine relationships, and shows real growth. But his introduction in 2015 was pure provocation. Parker and Stone were drawing a line in the sand. They were saying in their typically blunt way that policing language and enforcing ideological conformity is just as absurd as the things it claims to be fighting against. The reaction to PC Principal was, unsurprisingly, split along political lines. Conservative commentators loved it. They saw it as validation that political correctness had gone too far. Liberal commentators were less enthusiastic. Some accused the show of punching down or of enabling the kind of anti-progressive sentiment that was gaining traction in American politics. Others appreciated the nuance, noting that the show was mocking both the excesses of PC culture and the people who used backlash against PC culture as an excuse for genuine bigotry, which is, to be fair, exactly what the show was doing. South Park has never been easy to put in a political box, and the PC principle arc was a perfect example of that. Then came 2016, and things got really weird. Season 20 was the most heavily serialized season in the show's history. Instead of standalone episodes, it was a single continuous story arc that ran across all 10 episodes. The main plot involved an internet troll called SkankHunt42, who was terrorizing the school, a meta-commentary on online harassment and the way anonymity brings out the worst in people. But the season's most controversial element was its depiction of the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Garrison, the boys' teacher, who had already been established as one of the show's most unpredictable and morally flexible characters, became a stand-in for Donald Trump. The show leaned into the comparison, giving Garrison the same bombastic speaking style, the same contempt for political norms, and the same impossible-to-predict behavior. As the season went on and the real-world election heated up, the show tracked alongside it, updating its storylines to match what was actually happening in American politics. Here is where the production schedule becomes really important again. Because South Park can turn around an episode in 6 days, they were able to comment on the election almost in real time. When something happened on Monday, there could be a South Park episode about it by Wednesday. No other television show had that capability. And the result was a season that felt like it was unfolding alongside the actual news cycle, which was exhilarating and chaotic in equal measure. The problem was that Parker and Stone, like most people in the entertainment industry, and indeed most of the polling and prediction industries, expected Hillary Clinton to win the election. They had reportedly written their election night episode with that outcome in mind. When Trump won, they had to scramble to rewrite. The resulting episode captured the shock and confusion of the moment, but the season as a whole suffered from the pivot. The tightly plotted story arc that had been building for weeks suddenly had to change direction, and some of the narrative threads were left hanging or resolved awkwardly. The mixed reception of Season 20, which was widely viewed as the show's weakest fully serialized experiment, led Parker and Stone to pull back from strict serialization in subsequent seasons. They returned to a more episodic format with loose season-long arcs rather than single continuous stories. The creative lesson they took from the experience was that trying to track alongside real-world politics in real time, while thrilling, was also incredibly risky. If the world zags when you expected it to zig, your entire season can fall apart overnight. But the Trump satire did not end with Season 20. If anything, it intensified over the years. Season 27, which aired in 2025, featured a highly serialized narrative that depicted a caricature of Trump in his second presidential administration. The storyline portrayed an abusive romantic relationship between Trump and Satan. I want to make sure you heard that correctly. The show depicted the sitting president of the United States in a romantic relationship with the devil and played the whole thing as a metaphor for an abusive partnership. The season also featured parodies of Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, and various other political figures associated with the Trump administration, along with themes of government surveillance and cultural control. Season 28, also in 2025, continued the Trump storyline while adding new layers. Trump and J.D. Vance conspire to secretly abort Satan's baby. PC Principal gets into a physical fight with Jesus Christ over the direction of modern Christianity. Cartman becomes a born-again Christian. A character based on Peter Thiel investigates an internet meme that might be a sign of the Antichrist. It is, even by South Park standards, a lot. Now, I should say that satirizing politicians is nothing new for South Park. The show has mocked presidents from both parties throughout its entire run. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they have all appeared on the show in unflattering ways. But the Trump material is more sustained, more personal, and more provocative than anything the show has done with a sitting president before. The abusive relationship with Satan metaphor in particular is the kind of thing that would have been unthinkable on network television, but on South Park, it is just another season. Let me also talk about the pandemic. because the COVID era was a genuinely strange chapter in South Park's history. Season 24, which was supposed to air in 2020, was essentially scrapped in its traditional form. Instead of regular episodes, Parker and Stone produced a series of long-form specials. The Pandemic Special aired in September 2020 and was the first. It addressed the pandemic head-on, depicting South Park in lockdown, the boys learning remotely, and Randy Marsh being directly responsible for the creation of the virus because of course he was. The Pandemic Specials were controversial for a different reason than most South Park controversies. Instead of angering external groups, they divided the show's own fan base. Some viewers loved the COVID storylines and appreciated the show's willingness to satirize the pandemic in real time, while most of the entertainment industry was either ignoring it or treating it with kid gloves. Others felt that the specials were too dark, too cynical, and too mean-spirited at a time when people were dying and suffering. There is a real tension in making comedy about a global catastrophe while it is still happening, and the South Park specials lived right in the center of that tension. The post-COVID specials, which aired on Paramount Plus in late 2021, jumped forward in time to show the boys as adults dealing with the long-term aftermath of the pandemic. These specials were more warmly received, partly because they told a genuinely emotional story about friendship, regret, and the passage of time. But they also included sharp commentary on the way the pandemic was politicized, the dysfunction of the American healthcare system, and the long-term psychological damage that the experience inflicted on an entire generation. Another controversy that is worth mentioning from the modern era involves the show's treatment of school shootings. The episode Put It Down from season 21 in 2017 dealt with the threat of nuclear war via North Korea, and also included a subplot about Cartman threatening suicide for attention. But the show's broader treatment of gun violence in schools, which has come up in various episodes over the years, has always been a lightning rod. South Park exists in a strange space where it is a show about elementary school children that frequently depicts or references extreme violence, including school violence. The show has generally taken the position that this is part of its satirical function, holding up a mirror to a society that has normalized these tragedies. But not everyone agrees that an animated comedy is the right vehicle for that kind of commentary. I also want to touch on the Tegrity Farms era, because while this is not a traditional external controversy, it caused significant controversy within the fan base. Starting in season 22 in 2018, the character of Randy Marsh became increasingly dominant in the show. His marijuana farming operation, Tegrity Farms, became a central storyline that carried across multiple seasons. By season 23, Randy was arguably the show's main character, with the boys often relegated to supporting roles. A significant portion of the fan base was unhappy with this shift. South Park had always been about the boys. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were the heart of the show, and their interactions, friendships, and rivalries were what made it work. Giving the spotlight to Randy, who was always a great supporting character but was never designed to carry the show, felt to many viewers like a fundamental betrayal of what South Park was supposed to be. Online discussions became heated. YouTube video essays were made arguing that the show had lost its way. Ratings fluctuated. Parker and Stone, to their credit, seemed to listen. While Randy remains a major character, later seasons have gradually shifted focus back toward the boys and the broader ensemble cast. The Tegrity Farms complaints might seem trivial compared to death threats and government bans, but in terms of what actually affects the show's long-term health and audience, the internal fan controversy about creative direction may matter more than any external scandal. And then there is the streaming wars controversy, which is meta in the most South Park way possible. In 2022, the show produced 2 Paramount Plus specials called The Streaming Wars Part 1 and Part 2. These specials directly satirize the streaming industry, the way content is sliced up and distributed across competing platforms, and the greed of the companies involved. This was particularly pointed because South Park itself has been caught in the middle of the streaming wars. The show was on Hulu, then moved to HBO Max, then moved to Paramount Plus. Each transition involved hundreds of millions of dollars in licensing fees. Parker and Stone's $1.5 billion deal with Paramount Global in 2025 was the biggest deal in animated television history. They were satirizing the exact industry dynamics that they themselves were profiting enormously from. And the show was fully aware of this contradiction and leaned into it rather than away from it. One more thing from the modern era that I want to mention because I think it is genuinely fascinating. In 2023 and 2024, the show produced several Paramount Plus specials that dealt with artificial intelligence. Joining the Panderverse, which aired in October 2023, satirized the AI replacement anxiety that was sweeping through Hollywood and every other creative industry. Not Suitable for Children from December 2023 dealt with deepfakes and AI-generated content targeting minors. And The End of Obesity from May 2024 addressed the Ozempic craze and the pharmaceutical industry's relationship with weight loss. Each of these specials generated its own little controversy, but what struck me most about them is how they demonstrated the show's continued relevance. Nearly 30 years after its premiere, South Park is still identifying the cultural flashpoints of the moment and saying something sharp about them before anyone else can. The show's format has changed quite a bit over the years. Early seasons had 13 to 18 episodes. Modern seasons are much shorter, sometimes as few as 5 or 6 episodes. The Paramount Plus specials exist in a weird middle ground, longer than regular episodes at about 45 minutes each, but not quite movies. The total episode count of 338 is staggering for any show, and the fact that the quality, while obviously inconsistent over nearly 3 decades, remains broadly high is a genuine achievement. So that is the modern era, PC principle. Trump as Mr. Garrison in a romantic relationship with Satan. Pandemic specials made in real time. School shooting commentary. Cannabis farming storylines that divided the fan base. Streaming war satire funded by a streaming war deal. And AI episodes produced by humans making fun of AI, which is about as deliciously ironic as anything the show has ever done. And now, finally, I think it is time to wrap things up, to pull back and look at the whole picture, to ask the question that I think a lot of people have after hearing about all of these controversies. How is this show still on the air? How has it survived all of this? And what does its survival tell us about the culture it exists in? But before we get to the big reflective stuff, I want to take a few minutes to cover some of the individual controversies that we have not gotten to yet. Because as comprehensive as this has been, there are still a bunch of memorable moments that deserve at least a mention. South Park has been on the air for so long and has generated so much outrage that it is genuinely impossible to cover every single incident in full detail. But here are some of the ones that I think are worth knowing about. The N-word episode, or rather the episode where it was used prominently, is one that people still talk about. In season 11, an episode called With Apologies to Jesse Jackson aired in March 2007. The setup is that Randy Marsh appears on Wheel of Fortune and has to solve a puzzle where the clue is people who annoy you. The answer on the board shows N-G-E-R-S, and Randy, in front of a national television audience, blurts out the racial slur instead of the actual answer, which is naggers. The episode then follows the fallout, with Randy becoming a pariah and having to deal with the consequences of what he said, while simultaneously a subplot follows the boys dealing with a sensitivity training session about the word. The episode was controversial for obvious reasons. Using the N-word on television, even in a satirical context, even as part of a story about why using it is wrong, is inherently risky. But the episode was actually praised by quite a few critics for the way it handled the subject. It did not let Randy off the hook. He suffers real consequences. He is humiliated, ostracized, and forced to confront the impact of his words. And the B story, involving the boys, has a surprisingly thoughtful message about the difference between understanding why a word is hurtful on an intellectual level and actually feeling the weight of it. It is one of those South Park episodes that uses its shock value as a vehicle for something more substantial. And while it certainly made people uncomfortable, the discomfort was kind of the point. Then there is the show's long-running treatment of celebrities, which has generated more individual complaints and threatened lawsuits than practically anything else the show has done. South Park has, over its 28 seasons, directly parodied hundreds of real public figures. Some of those people have taken it in stride, others have been genuinely upset. Barbra Streisand, who was turned into a giant monster in season 1, reportedly did not appreciate the portrayal. Paris Hilton was depicted in a spectacularly unflattering episode in season 8 called Stupid Spoiled Horror Video Playset, where the boys' female classmates become obsessed with imitating her lifestyle, and the episode includes a gag where Hilton's pet dogs keep committing suicide. Kanye West was the subject of an entire episode in season 13 where he cannot understand a joke about fish sticks and becomes increasingly angry about it. It is one of the show's most popular episodes, and Kanye reportedly was not a fan. One of the most talked about celebrity reactions came from Ed Sheeran, who has publicly stated that the South Park joke about gingers, which runs across multiple episodes starting with Season 9's Ginger Kids, had a real impact on his life. Sheeran, who has red hair, said in interviews that the episode made it harder for him growing up because kids at school would quote the show's anti-ginger rhetoric at him. Whether you think that is South Park's responsibility or just kids being kids using whatever ammunition is available to them is debatable, but it is a real-world consequence of the show's satire that affected a real person. The Tom Cruise situation is worth revisiting briefly because it extends beyond just Trapped in the Closet. Cruise appeared in multiple episodes over the years. In episode 200, as we discussed, he was working at a fudge factory and assembles a celebrity army of everyone the show has ever mocked. The running theme across all of his appearances is the closet joke, which the show revisits from every possible angle. And the show's official South Park wiki notes that even after all the controversy, Cruise was brought back again and again. The character's dead body was even shown on the surface of the moon in the final shot of episode 201, placed next to the dead whale from a completely different episode called Free Wilsix. It is exactly the kind of petty, ridiculous, darkly funny callback that South Park excels at. Another controversy that often gets overlooked is the show's handling of disability. The character Timmy, a wheelchair-bound child with severe speech limitations, was introduced in Season 4. He became hugely popular, but his popularity itself was controversial. Disability advocates had mixed reactions. Some felt the character was mocking disabled people. Others felt he was one of the most positive depictions of disability on television because Timmy was treated as a full member of the group, included in everything the other boys did, and his disability was never treated as the entirety of his character. He had friends, participated in adventures, and was generally accepted by everyone around him. The show itself seemed aware of the tension and addressed it directly in an episode called Cripple Fight, which explored the politics of disability representation in characteristically unsubtle fashion. Jimmy Velmer, another disabled character who uses crutches and has a speech impediment, was introduced later and has become one of the show's most beloved and well-developed characters. Jimmy is a stand-up comedian, which the show uses to explore ideas about humor, offense, and the right to make jokes about difficult topics. There's something very meta about a show that is constantly accused of insensitivity, having one of its most sympathetic characters be a disabled comedian whose entire purpose is to make people laugh about things that might make them uncomfortable. Whether that is genuine thoughtfulness or just Parker and Stone being clever, I will leave for you to decide. The show's treatment of race has been a constant source of controversy throughout its run. Token Black, later revealed to actually be named Tolkien Black, is the only black kid in the main cast, and his very name was a commentary on racial tokenism in entertainment. For years, fans assumed his name was Token, a joke about him being the token black character. In a Season 25 episode called The Big Fix, it was revealed that his name is actually Tolkien, after J.R.R. Tolkien, and that Stan is the only person who has been spelling and pronouncing it wrong this entire time. The episode was a clever meta-commentary on assumptions about race, naming, and the ways that well-meaning white people can be oblivious to their own biases. Chef's character, before Isaac Hayes departed, was also a subject of occasional criticism. While Chef was one of the most popular characters on the show, some critics pointed out that he was a black man, whose primary traits were being good at cooking and being sexually promiscuous, which are racial stereotypes with a long and unpleasant history. Others argued that Chef was one of the wisest, most competent, and most beloved characters on the show, and that reducing him to those stereotypes ignored the warmth, humor, and depth that Hayes brought to the role. It is one of those debates where both sides have valid points, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the messy middle. The show has also generated controversy for its depiction of other marginalized groups. The episode Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina from Season 9 depicted the character undergoing gender reassignment surgery in graphic, exaggerated fashion. Trans advocates and allies criticized the episode for being transphobic. The show's defenders argued that it was not mocking trans people specifically, but rather the absurdity of wanting to be something you biologically cannot be, which was illustrated by parallel subplots where Kyle wants to be tall and black and his father wants to be a dolphin. Whether that defense holds up is again a matter of perspective. but the episode generated significant discussion and remains one of the show's most divisive. What is interesting about all of these individual controversies is that they rarely stick for very long. South Park generates outrage like a factory produces widgets. It is constant, it is varied, and each new controversy tends to replace the previous one in the public consciousness fairly quickly. The show has survived, not despite the controversies, but because of them. Each one generates media coverage. Each one drives viewership. Each one reinforces the show's brand as the thing that says what nobody else will say. It is a self-sustaining cycle, and Parker and Stone understand it perfectly. They have been playing the game for nearly 30 years, and they have gotten very, very good at it. The show's awards history is worth mentioning here because it provides an interesting counterpoint to the controversy narrative. South Park has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards. It won a Peabody Award in 2005 or 2006 for what the Peabody Committee described as distinguished and biting social commentary. It has won a Critics' Choice Television Award for Best Animated Series. The theatrical film was nominated for an Academy Award. The show has an 8.7 out of 10 overall rating on IMDb with over 441,000 ratings. These are not the accolades of a show that is merely provocative. These are the accolades of a show that is, by the consensus of critics, awards bodies, and audiences, genuinely good at what it does. The Peabody Award is particularly noteworthy because the Peabody is one of the most prestigious honors in broadcasting. It is typically given to serious journalism and socially important programming. Giving it to an animated show where a talking piece of feces is a recurring Christmas character was, to put it mildly, unexpected. But the Peabody Committee recognized what a lot of critics have recognized over the years. Underneath the profanity, the vulgarity, and the deliberately offensive surface, South Park is doing something that very few other shows attempt. It is engaging directly, honestly, and fearlessly with the issues that define the moment. The crudeness is not the point. It is the vehicle for the point. And the point is usually sharper than people give it credit for. So let's talk about why South Park has survived, because I think the answer is more interesting than you might expect. The obvious answer is that the show is funny, and it is. Consistently, reliably, genuinely funny. Even in its weaker seasons, even when the storylines do not quite work, there are always moments that make you laugh out loud. Parker is a gifted comedy writer, possibly one of the best of his generation, and Stone is a brilliant collaborator who brings out the best in Parker's ideas. Together, they have created a comedic voice that is instantly recognizable, endlessly quotable, and almost impossible to imitate. Other shows have tried to do what South Park does. None of them have succeeded for more than a season or two. There is something about the specific combination of childish absurdity and adult intelligence that Parker and Stone hit that nobody else has been able to replicate. But being funny is not enough to explain 3 decades of survival. Plenty of funny shows get canceled. Plenty of funny shows wear out their welcome. South Park has endured because it does something that no other show on television does. It operates in real time with real stakes, and it tells the truth as its creators see it, regardless of who that truth offends. Think about what that actually means in practice. Every week, Parker and Stone sit down and ask themselves what is happening in the world right now that nobody else is willing to talk about honestly. Then they write a script about it. Then they produce it in 6 days. Then they air it. And they do this knowing that any given episode might anger a religious organization, a government, a corporation, a celebrity, or a group willing to make death threats. They do it anyway, every single week, for 28 years. That kind of sustained creative courage, or recklessness, or stubbornness, whatever you want to call it, is genuinely rare. There are plenty of people who will say provocative things once and then retreat when the backlash comes. There are plenty of people who will be edgy in their 20s and then mellow out as they get older and wealthier and have more to lose. Parker and Stone are now in their 50s. They have a combined net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars. They have children. They have a $1.5 billion deal with a major media conglomerate. And they are still making episodes where the President of the United States is in a romantic relationship with the devil. If anything, they have gotten more provocative as they have gotten older, not less. There is a documentary about the show's production process called 6 Days to Air that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And I want to come back to it now because I think it reveals something important about why the show is the way it is. The documentary follows the creation of a single episode from start to finish. And watching it, you realize that the insane time pressure of the 6-day schedule is not just a logistical challenge. It is a creative philosophy. Parker has said that working under that kind of pressure forces him to go with his gut instinct. There's no time for second guessing, there's no time for focus groups or network notes or the kind of careful, committee-driven process that smooths the edges off most television. The first idea, the raw idea, the one that makes you nervous and excited at the same time, that is the one that makes it to air. Because there is literally no time to come up with a safer alternative. And I think that explains a lot about why South Park's controversies feel different from the controversies generated by other shows. Most television controversies are calculated. A show will push a boundary because market research suggests their audience will respond positively, or because a social media campaign suggests there is attention to be gained. South Park's controversies are organic. They come from two guys sitting in a room asking each other what the funniest, truest, most uncomfortable thing they can say about this week's topic is, and then saying it before they have time to talk themselves out of it. The 6-day production cycle is not just fast, it is honest in a way that slower, more deliberate production schedules do not allow for. This production philosophy has occasionally backfired. In season 27 in 2025, Parker and Stone actually missed a production deadline on the 5th episode and had to issue a public apology. That is the first time in the show's history that a deadline was missed. And the fact that it took 28 years and over 300 episodes for it to happen even once is honestly kind of remarkable. The 6-day cycle has produced some of the sharpest, funniest, most culturally relevant television of the past 3 decades. And the cost has been 100-hour work weeks, exhausted production teams, and the occasional episode that does not quite land because there simply was not enough time to get it right. A power outage even delayed the season's 17 premiere back in 2013, which gives you a sense of how razor-thin the margins are. When you are finishing an episode hours before it airs, any disruption, a power outage, a software crash, a writer's block that lasts one day too long, can derail the entire operation. The fact that this system has worked as reliably as it has for as long as it has is a testament to the team that Parker and Stone have built around them. Roughly 70 people work on each episode, and they have to function like a well-oiled machine under conditions that would break most production companies. I think part of the reason for that is the equal opportunity philosophy I mentioned earlier. Because South Park does not discriminate in its targets, it is very difficult for any one group to build a sustained campaign against it. If you're a Christian who is angry about the Jesus depiction, well, the show also went after Scientology harder than any other program in history. If you're a liberal who thinks the show is too conservative, well, it also brutally satirized Trump and the Republican Party. If you're a conservative who thinks it validates your worldview, well, it also created PC Principle as a commentary on how conservative backlash to progressivism can be just as mindless as the progressivism it opposes. Everyone can find something in South Park that they agree with, and everyone can find something that infuriates them. And that balance, imperfect as it may be, is what has allowed the show to maintain its position as a cultural institution. The show's relationship with its audience is also worth examining. South Park's viewership has fluctuated over the years, as you would expect for any show that has been on the air for nearly 3 decades. The peak was in the late 90s, when episodes were regularly pulling 5 to 6 million viewers. The all-time most-watched episode was Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut / Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, a 2-part story from the end of Season 1 and the beginning of Season 2, which drew approximately 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers and an 8.2 Nielsen rating. At that time, it was the highest-rated non-sports program in basic cable history. More recently, the numbers tell a more nuanced story. Season 27 in 2025 was actually a comeback of sorts. The premiere episode drew 5.9 million cross-platform viewers across Comedy Central and Paramount Plus in its first 3 days. The second episode drew around 6.2 million, making it the most watched episode since 2018. Those are impressive numbers that show the audience is still there, especially when you account for how much the media landscape has changed since the show's peak. Nobody watches anything on cable the way they did in the late 90s. The fact that South Park can still pull those kinds of numbers in the streaming age speaks to the loyalty and passion of its fan base. Linear television numbers, the traditional measurement of who watched the show live on the night it aired, are much lower. Season 28 averaged roughly 438,000 viewers per episode on Comedy Central. But this is misleading because the vast majority of the audience is watching on Paramount+, the South Park Studios website, or other digital platforms. The show's true reach is much larger than the linear numbers suggest, and the streaming numbers are the reason Paramount Global was willing to pay $1.5 billion to keep it. Something I find really interesting is the way the show's reputation has evolved among younger viewers who did not grow up with it. For people who were teenagers in the late 90s and early 2000s, South Park is a defining cultural touchstone. It shaped their sense of humor, their political worldview, and their understanding of what comedy could be and do. For younger people who are encountering it for the first time, it can be a more complicated experience. Some of the show's earlier episodes contain jokes and attitudes that feel dated or uncomfortable by modern standards. The show's willingness to use slurs, mock marginalized groups, and treat everything as fair game for humor does not always land the same way it did in 1997. But I think this is actually part of what makes South Park interesting as a cultural artifact. It is a living record of how American attitudes toward humor, offense, and free expression have changed over nearly 30 years. Watching early South Park and then watching recent South Park is like watching the country's evolving relationship with its own sense of humor. What was funny in 1997 is not necessarily funny in 2025. What was considered edgy in 2005 might seem tame now. And the show itself has evolved alongside those changing standards, sometimes leading the conversation and sometimes reacting to it. Parker and Stone have also evolved as people and as artists, even if they would probably bristle at the characterization. The Book of Mormon, their Broadway musical that debuted in 2011, is in many ways a refinement of everything South Park taught them about satire. It is profane, it is provocative, it mocks religion directly and without hesitation, but it is also genuinely affectionate toward its characters, and ultimately delivers a message about the value of faith, even imperfect faith in people's lives. It won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. It is one of the most successful Broadway shows of the 21st century. And it demonstrates that Parker and Stone are not just provocateurs. They are craftsmen who happen to be provocateurs. Now, I have spent a long time talking about all the things South Park has done wrong, or at least all the things that various people think it has done wrong. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge what the show has done right, because the controversies, as entertaining as they are to talk about, do not tell the full story. South Park has, on multiple occasions, been ahead of the cultural curve in ways that genuinely mattered. The Scientology episode helped mainstream skepticism of the organization at a time when it was still largely seen as just another celebrity religion. The Muhammad episodes, despite their complicated legacy, forced a genuine national conversation about the limits of free expression in a democratic society. The Banned in China episode was one of the first major Western cultural products to directly challenge Chinese censorship of the entertainment industry, a topic that has only become more relevant in the years since. The show's early episodes about drug policy, immigration, environmental activism, and corporate greed were often years ahead of the mainstream discourse on those topics. And on a more personal level, the show has provided comfort, laughter, and a sense of community to millions of people over the years. For a lot of viewers, especially those who grew up feeling like outsiders, South Park was the thing that told them it was okay to think differently, to question authority, to laugh at things that other people said you were not supposed to laugh at. I should also mention one more episode that has become legendary in its own right, Woodland Critter Christmas from Season 8, which aired on December 15th, 2004. This was the show's holiday special for that year, and on the surface, it looks like a sweet, narrated Christmas fairy tale about cute woodland animals preparing for the birth of a baby porcupine. It is told in rhyming verse, with Cartman as the narrator, and the animation is deliberately soft and warm and Christmassy. And then about halfway through, the entire thing takes a hard turn into absolute insanity. The woodland critters turn out to be satanic cultists. They perform blood sacrifices. They summon the Antichrist. The episode goes from 0 to completely unhinged in a way that genuinely catches you off guard, even if you think you know what to expect from South Park. Woodland Critter Christmas generated complaints from parents who made the mistake of letting their children watch what they assumed, based on the title and the first few minutes, was a harmless holiday cartoon, which honestly is kind of their fault for not knowing what show they were watching. But the episode also became a fan favorite precisely because of how effectively it subverted expectations. It is regularly cited in lists of the show's best episodes, and it demonstrates something important about South Park's approach to controversy. The show does not just shock for the sake of shocking, it sets up expectations deliberately and then destroys them. The comedy comes from the gap between what you think is going to happen and what actually happens. And in Woodland Critter Christmas, that gap is wider than in almost any other episode. The holiday specials in general have been a reliable source of minor controversy over the years. Mr. Hanky the Christmas Poo, the talking piece of feces who debuted in Season 1, offended people who felt that associating Christmas with fecal matter was disrespectful. The episode, It's Christmas in Canada from Season 7 was Emmy-nominated, but also annoyed some Canadian viewers with its stereotypical depictions. The Black Friday trilogy from Season 17 was a 3-part epic that satirized both Black Friday consumer culture and the Game of Thrones fandom simultaneously, and it managed to offend both retail workers who felt their struggles were being trivialized and Game of Thrones fans who felt the parody was too on the nose. Offending two completely unrelated groups with the same storyline is, in its own way, an impressive achievement. That sense of permission, the feeling that nothing is too sacred to be examined and nothing is too powerful to be mocked, is genuinely liberating for a lot of people. And while that philosophy can be taken too far and can be used to justify cruelty, at its best it represents something valuable about the human spirit, the refusal to be cowed, the insistence on thinking for yourself, the belief that laughter is not just entertainment but a form of resistance. Looking at the numbers one more time, 28 seasons, 338 episodes, 5 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, an Oscar-nominated film, a 9-time Tony Award-winning Broadway musical, 5 episodes permanently banned from all platforms, an entire franchise erased from the internet of the world's most populous country, death threats from extremist organizations, a beloved voice actor lost to circumstances beyond his control, a $1.5 billion renewal deal, and the show is still going, still writing episodes in 6 days, still airing on Wednesday nights, still making people laugh and making people angry in roughly equal measure. That is a legacy. And whatever you think about the show, whether you love it or hate it or think it is a relic of a less enlightened era, you have to admit that there has never been anything else quite like it. There probably never will be. I want to close with something that I think captures the spirit of South Park better than any controversy or award or business deal. It is the fake apology to China that Parker and Stone posted in 2019. The one that said, like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. That statement was absurd, it was funny, it was pointed, and it was fearless. It was everything the show has always been, distilled into a single tweet. And the fact that it came from 2 guys who started out making paper cutout cartoons in their dorm room and are now sitting on top of a billion-dollar empire still refusing to play nice with anyone is the real story. South Park is not a show that has survived its controversies. It is a show that is made of its controversies. The controversies are not bugs in the system. They are the system. Every outraged letter, every government ban, every death threat, every celebrity complaint, every angry op-ed, every think piece about whether the show has gone too far, all of it feeds the machine. And the machine keeps running, 6 days at a time, week after week, year after year, decade after decade. And that, my dear friends, is where we will end tonight's journey through the many, many controversies of South Park. We have covered Scientology and the tragedy of Isaac Hayes. We have covered the Muhammad saga and the episodes that were banned after credible death threats. We have covered Steve Irwin, the Bloody Mary episode, and the Catholic League. We have covered the China ban and the greatest fake apology in television history. We have covered the India ban, the Australian video game censorship, the PC principle debates, the Trump satire, the pandemic specials, the Tegrity Farms fan revolt, and all the individual celebrity dust-ups scattered in between. And I know there is more. There is always more with South Park. There are episodes and incidents I did not get to. The Terrence and Phillip controversy within the show's own fictional universe. The time they mocked Al Gore as a deranged cryptid hunter chasing Man-Bear-Pig, and then years later did a follow-up that was widely interpreted as an apology for not taking climate change seriously enough. The World of Warcraft episode that won an Emmy and helped bring machinima into the mainstream, the way the show predicted and satirized the streaming wars years before they became the dominant force in entertainment. There is enough material for another whole video, maybe even two. But for now, I think this is a good place to rest. We have been going for a while, and if you have made it this far, thank you for spending the evening with me. Whether you drifted off somewhere around the Muhammad saga or the China ban or wherever your brain decided it was time to let go, that is perfectly fine. That is what this is for. I want to leave you with one last thought. For all the anger it generates, for all the groups it has offended and all the lines it has crossed, South Park at its core is a show about friendship. 4 kids in a small town trying to make sense of a world that does not make any sense. They fight, they make up, they go on insane adventures, and they always end up back where they started, together. And in the middle of all the controversy and chaos, that is the thing that has kept people coming back for nearly 30 years. Not the shock value, not the celebrities, not the censorship debates, the friendship. Stan and Kyle and Cartman and Kenny. 4 paper cutout kids in a mountain town in Colorado. They have outlasted presidents, survived death threats, been banned by governments, lost a beloved cast member, and somehow kept going through a global pandemic, a streaming revolution, and the complete transformation of the media landscape. Their show has been called the worst thing on television and the best thing on television, sometimes in the same week, sometimes by the same person. It has won Emmys and Peabodys and been nominated for Oscars, and it has also been the target of more organized boycott campaigns and angry letters than probably any other show in history. And through all of it, every Wednesday night, Trey Parker sits down at his desk, starts writing, and 70 people sprint through 6 days of production to get another 22 minutes of crude, brilliant, fearless comedy onto the air. That is the real story of South Park. Not any single controversy, but the accumulation of all of them. The sheer, relentless refusal to stop, to slow down, to play it safe, to grow up, or to shut up. For better and for worse, that is what the show is. And honestly, I cannot imagine television without it. If you enjoyed tonight's video, consider subscribing. I have got more content planned, and I would love to have you along for the ride. But for now, wherever you are, I hope you are warm, I hope you are comfortable, and I hope you have sweet dreams. Good night. And hey, if you are still awake, which honestly would be impressive given how long we have been going, maybe go watch an episode, any episode. Start with Scott Tenorman Must Die if you have never seen it. Start with Make Love Not Warcraft if you want something lighter. Start with Trapped in the Closet if you want to understand what all the fuss was about.